Let's be honest, the helper T cell is maybe not the most epic of all the immune cells. I mean, it's got helper right in the name. It doesn't do the thing, it helps the cell that does the thing. But just because it's not epic doesn't mean it's not an absolutely critical part of the immune system. So here we have our young, naive helper T cell, represented by our usual helper squire. And this helper squire needs a gentle nudge by an antigen presenting cell to push him towards one of three fates, becoming a Th1, a Th2, or a Th17. 17, really? I think you should have to have a license before you're allowed to name stuff in biology. As we go through this sketch, we'll focus on two main concepts. First, how do we get from a naive T helper cell to a differentiated Th1, Th2, or Th17? And in particular, what cytokines do we need to make that transformation happen? And then we'll talk about, once it's differentiated, what cytokines does that cell release, and what other immune cells do those cytokines summon to the battle? So let's start with Th1. Down this path, we've got Dendrilox, our symbol for a dendritic cell, although this could be really any antigen presenting cell. And Dendrilox is holding a neon yellow calendar, which serves to keep her busy 12-month antigen presenting schedule organized. But for our purposes, it also symbolizes IL-12, a cytokine which causes the naive T helper squire to differentiate into a type 1 helper T cell. This transformation can also be affected by another cytokine, interferon gamma, which will represent with Sketchy's recurring symbol of the interfering ferret. As a quick aside, here at Sketchy, every time we symbolize an interleukin, we make it neon yellow, and that helps distinguish it from other types of cytokines. So that's why the IL-12 calendar is neon yellow, but the ferret isn't. And just like that, you have a newly minted Th1 cell, as evidenced by the single feather in his hat. Th1 cells are especially good for fighting intracellular pathogens, which we'll represent with the rodent infestation inside this creepy shack. Now, the Th1 helper squire is kind of lazy, doesn't want to get his hands dirty by directly fighting these house mouse dragons, so he recruits others to do his dirty work for him. How? Well, with more cytokines, of course. Th1 releases interferon gamma, so our ginger ferret is back, and IL-2, which is our two-beaked, two-tailed neon yellow owl. These cytokines summon the cells that will actually take on those pathogens with their bare hands. Which cells are those? Well, here comes the macrocage kid and the killer 8-Night, representing macrophages and killer T cells. They're in the business of killing mouses, and business is good. It's mice, the word is mice. Th1 cells are generally the good guys, but they can get a little overeager and cause things like autoimmune diseases and chronic inflammatory conditions. We'll symbolize those generally with our chronic grandfather clock above this roaring, inflammatory fireplace. Let's head back out and move down the second possible pathway for our naive helper squire. Down this side, Dendrilox is casting a spell with a neon yellow 4-shaped bell, which, ding ding ding, stands for the IL-4 cytokine. This cytokine will trigger the squire to transform into a T helper squire with not one, but two feathers in his cap, or the type 2 T helper cell. These Th2 cells are known for taking on helminths by releasing IL-4, again our neon yellow 4-shaped bell, and IL-5, which is the neon yellow glove. Get it? 5 fingers? Now, these cytokines in turn summon Lady Io and the Master Beekeeper. That's our eosinophil and mast cell. Other mediators in this anti-helminth process include IgE and macrophages. So, since we're talking about eosinophils and mast cells, it should be no surprise that Th2 cells are also linked to allergic reactions. We'll symbolize that with this sneezing beekeeper. Gesundheit, my dude. Of note, Th2 cells can also secrete the cytokine IL-13, which has similar effects to IL-4 and has been implicated in respiratory conditions, particularly asthma. So it's a sneezy and wheezy scenario. So we said Th1 deals with intracellular pathogens and Th2 deals with big, ugly helminths. But what about just regular extracellular pathogens? Well, don't worry, we got a cell type for those too. And that's Th17. And if this 17 guy looks a little angsty, can you really blame him? He's 17 and he's stuck wearing this giant feather hat. So I know that earlier in the sketch I was making fun of Th17's name, but I was being a little unfair because it actually does kind of make sense. Th17 cells release IL-17. Look at that. Th17 also releases IL-22, or for our purposes, IL-22. You know what I always say, a feathery cap and a feathery butt makes for a memorable symbol. Anyway, the release of IL-17 and IL-22 activates neutrophils, which we'll symbolize with our recurring first responder. While Th17 is helpful in barrier defense in the intestines, for example, and increasing the PMN response, it can also cause some pretty severe problems when it runs amok. Th17 is associated with psoriasis, which we'll symbolize here with Th17's Squire of the Year plaque, and rheumatoid arthritis, symbolized by his bandaged knee, among other autoimmune diseases. Well, it looks like the dragon mice are starting to get the upper hand, or teeny dragon mouse claw paw. But before we grab a tutu and join in, let's do a quick review. Naive helper T cells can differentiate into Th1, Th2, or Th17 subtypes following the release of specific cytokines by APCs. Differentiation into the Th1 subtype occurs when an antigen-presenting cell releases IL-12 and interferon gamma. Th1 cells fight against intracellular pathogens by releasing cytokines interferon gamma and IL-2. Those lead to the activation of macrophages and killer T cells. On the downside, Th1 cells are linked to chronic inflammatory conditions. Th2 cells are produced when an APC releases IL-4. Th2 cells play a role in fighting helminths, and they release cytokines IL-4 and IL-5. Those two cytokines activate eosinophils, mast cells, IgE, and macrophages. Th2 cells, however, are linked to allergic reactions. Th17 cells fight against extracellular pathogens by releasing cytokines IL-17 and IL-22, which trigger the recruitment of neutrophils. Unfortunately, Th17 is associated with psoriasis, rheumatoid arthritis, and other autoimmune diseases. Oh my god, these little rodents can still breathe fire? No way. Looks like these T helpers have this under control, so I'm gonna magic my way out of here.